And welcome to episode 29 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast, brought to you by Logicata. I'm Karl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm trying to think of some words that are not as always, but those are the ones that trip off the tongue. So I'm joined, as ever, by my colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Oh, I'm impressed. You tried. You did. You really tried. I'm
I
impressed.
tried not to say it, but just nothing else trips off the tongue as naturally as always. Anyway, we've had a little bit of a hiatus. You've been flying solo for a couple of episodes while I've been laid up on my sick bed, but I'm back now, and hopefully I can get through half an hour of waffling without coughing too much into my pop filter. But how was it for you flying solo?
How was it for me? Oh dear, that's not something you want to hear at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The first one was all right because we'd planned that one. The second one, when you were just like not there, that was awful. I think in the preamble I said, "Please come back."
Yeah, well, it's always difficult taking on someone else's role, no matter how simple it might seem.
Or simple
It's
they
easy.
might seem.
Indeed, yeah, I see. I'm very simple. Yeah, very simple. Did you see I got another cert the other day though?
No.
Doesn't really count. It
Oh,
wasn't a proctored
it's
exam, but
yeah. It's one of those
yeah.
fake business ones, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it's real. Yeah, not proper exam conditions. So it took me a grand total of about 45 minutes, but now I can proclaim myself as a generative AI expert. Yeah, nice fashionable badge to have right now. So we did have a guest booked for today, but through some cock up here, there, or wherever, the guest is no longer with us. So you'll have to put up with just John and myself for this episode. If you're new to the podcast, every week I curate a list of AWS news, which goes out to the world every Friday in an AWS News Roundup email newsletter. And then John and I pick a subset of the articles from the newsletter that we'd like to talk about in a bit more detail on the podcast. So we've got a bunch of articles that we'd like to talk to you about this week. Put my teeth in. Strangely enough, I think possibly for the first time ever, none of them are about serverless.
No, that's because you say that John and I do most of the talk, do the picks, and that's because most of the picks are usually me with the odd business one from you, and you've done all of them this week. So I don't know what I'm going to be able to say because it's all about business and insurance and yeah.
Well, here we go. It's going to be a test. So, and as you say, the first article this week is all about insurance. And you might ask, well, what the hell has insurance got to do with AWS? But this article is about the world of cyber insurance. The title is 5 Value Propositions That Make AWS Cyber Insurance Transformative for Customers. And really what this is talking about is a new cyber insurance initiative that AWS has undertaken to simplify the process of obtaining cyber insurance for AWS customers. So what do you make of this one, John? I hope you've had a chance to read the article.
Cyber insurance is a funny one because it's kind of been bumbling around a little bit for about 10 or 15 years. It's not a new idea, but you'd have seen it from like the really big players, and they'd be insuring millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of policies and whatever. You're talking like your Lloyds of London type people. And then you sort of start seeing your SMBs getting kind of looked after with like your Hiscoxes and such. And I only remember that because I saw an advert for it going to work, like on the tube. So, okay. But it's kind of bumbled around and not really done anything. You think, well, why do you need cyber insurance? What even is it? So on and so on. The short version, as I understand it, is it's insurance in case you have a data breach, you get hacked, something gets blown up on you for one reason or another, and then you have lots of unhappy customers, lots of lost revenue. It could be revenue protection, it could be protection against legal action and being sued, so on and so on and so on. Cyber insurance generally has been quite hard to do, and the article does sort of say this because historically it's been something that was very, very manually quoted. It was very custom. It was entirely based on your kind of workloads, and there was sort of nothing like rubber stampy. Because if you think about, say, getting a house insurance policy or a car insurance policy, because I'm willing to bet that the majority of our listeners have not bought cyber insurance, even for like a car insurance policy, you're still filling out 5 or 6 pages of information. And yes, that's been made easy with comparison services and what have you, but you're still putting in who you are, what you do, what your other half does if you're putting them on the car, what the car is, where you live, so on and so on and so on. There's all of these different risk factors, and that's just for a car, right? And you have to have that. Cyber insurance has been, as it says in the article, traditionally manual and cumbersome, especially for SMBs, because certainly in our customer space, when we focus on SMBs, they might have a small team, if they're lucky, looking after their cloud estate. They're going to be engineers. They're going to report probably to someone with a C or an MD type person that isn't necessarily insurance minded. They want to be running their business, not worrying about the ins and outs of how they're protected. So it kind of never really happened, because you'd have to go to a provider. They'd say, well, can you tell me about your posture for this and your posture for that, and how you're dealing with this, that, and the other threats, and what's your procedure for dealing with CVEs? And it would all just kind of be awkward silences, tumbleweeds, and say, oh, yeah, CVEs, I know what they are. And then you get someone going, oh, I know what the acronym is, but what's your procedure for dealing with 0 days and patching? We have a procedure. It was kind of, it was that sort of conversation. So it was always very awkward. What this is doing, what the article's talking about, what AWS is doing, is it feels not like a comparison site. I'm going to great pains to avoid saying the words, even though that most of them use AWS. It doesn't feel like that so much as a marketplace, so much as like a piece of intermediary work, more like a partner program than anything else. Because you're not going out, filling out the same information and just getting back 30 quotes, but that feels like part of the goal. Because one of the things they're saying is a qualified quote within 2 business days, and you can access partner companies for easier assessment and advice, because again, you probably have only a couple of people in the team, so you need help with that kind of thing. Loads of insurers, both large and small. So you could go to your Lloyd's of London and they'll charge you X amount, or you could go to X, Y, and Z insurance company who specializes in your particular workload and pay a little bit less money for a little bit less cover, and so on and so on. AWS being an intermediary is good, because I didn't know that more than a couple of cyber insurance firms existed. So you would have nowhere to even look beyond Googling it. And this kind of cuts the Google search out. And it was also going to people that you'd like to think AWS has vetted at least a little bit to make sure that they do, in fact, offer insurance policies and it's not a scam. So you'd like to think that. And again, it gives the insurers a level of warm, happy, fuzzy feeling, lack of a better term, that the companies that are talking to them have done a measure of due diligence. They've used at least AWS's security tools, Security Hub, Guard Duty, whatever, and they can kind of see in the account a lot easier what's going on. So it generally makes life a little bit easier. Insurance is something that lots of people should be considering. I'm not saying everyone needs to consider it, because if you're running a microservice blog or something, you're just blogging about it, it doesn't really matter. You've got no data. If you're holding PII, you probably do want an insurance policy, because you're going to get sued if that gets breached, or you're going to get GDPR fines and all the rest of it. So you probably do want something if you're holding certain sorts of sensitive data. Generally speaking, the TLDR of all of this is insurance is, I'd call it a necessary annoyance, not an evil, an annoyance. Because if you need to claim on it, then you need it and you're very grateful for having it. I mean, I claimed on my house insurance about a year ago, and I was incredibly grateful that I had it, even though I had to pay my excess, the policy, and all the rest of it. Because for the sake of a small policy and a smallish excess, I ended up with £40,000 worth of work done for me, and I paid like 400 quid. So grateful to have it, but it's a pain in the ass to set up. And I think this is just removing that barrier to an extent.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Security Hub, and I think that's the key to it. It's often difficult for the insurers to, or I guess it's difficult for the insurers to assess what your security posture is. And Security Hub, I guess, takes some of that pain of assessment away, because it's already doing that assessment for you. And by the insurers working in partnership with AWS, they will actually understand what they're looking at. Because I think that's a lot of the time, businesses may have evidence of their security posture, but if that evidence is not presented in such a way that the insurer actually knows what the hell they're looking at, then it's going to have no value whatsoever. So, if AWS is bringing these insurers into the program training them up and explaining to them what they are looking for in terms of the output security hub, etc., then that should really help to streamline the process. One of the things I noticed, I'd seen a few other articles, announcements about this, etc., and mentions of sort of 12 different insurers and that kind of thing. I couldn't help but notice there's only 3 of them on the partner page at the moment. So maybe this is another one of those kind of early stage announcements of something that's being developed as we speak. But there's only actually 3 insurers listed on the page right now. So it'd be great to see that increasing. But one of the things I did like about this is it mentions SMBs a lot. So our customers are typically SMBs and often get forgotten about this sort of thing because AWS tends to be very kind of enterprise focused. But it's great to see that small and medium businesses have absolutely been thought about in this particular program because things that are designed for the enterprise space tend not to work very well in the SMB space. It's not a one size fits all. These are not companies that are going to be spending millions of pounds a year on insurance. These are small companies that have thousands of pounds a year to spend on insurance, and it's good to know that they've been considered throughout this process. So watch your space, I guess. What were the 5 value propositions from the article? They were getting a guaranteed cyber insurance quote in 2 days or less, which seems great. Dozens of insurers, large and small, participating. That was the comment that I saw there, because I can only see 3 at the moment, but it's not criticism, just an observation. Easy access for partner companies looking to help with assessment and advisory services. Great for us. AWS is an intermediary between consumers and insurance partners, which I guess can only be a good thing to help facilitate those conversations. And then streamlining a traditionally manual and cumbersome process, especially for SMBs, as I mentioned. So those were the 5 value propositions highlighted by the article. Anyway, conscious of time, let's move on from cyber insurance, but actually it's a really neat segue into our next article, which was all about Security Hub. So we've mentioned Security Hub in the context of cyber insurance, but that's not its sole raison d'etre. Obviously, Security Hub is a tool which is basically performing lots of automated checks against your AWS environment. And this particular article, the reason it got into the newsletter this week is because AWS have recently launched 12 new controls for Security Hub, taking the total number of controls to 276, which is a lot of controls. But tell us a bit more about it, John. What is Security Hub, and what are these controls, and why should we care?
Well, you care so you can get your cyber insurance sorted out, obviously.
Well, yeah, we're giving you a reason now to care. That is definitely one of the reasons to care, but I think there are others.
Yeah, I mean, before that, it's just kind of a nice service that sort of links the 2 together. But what it does is it takes data from various other security tools. So Macy, Guard Duty, Amazon Inspector, yada, 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 yada. And it puts them all in kind of one place that you can see in the console that you can have a look at, and you can see here are the security findings, here are things that I need to care about, don't need to care about. And I've said yada yada yada, but it obviously includes CloudTrail, which is kind of the key one there. So it can see everything that's going on in your account, assuming you've enabled these services. Like if you're not running workloads in S3 that have any data in S3, 1, what are you doing? But 2, you don't need Macy because it only looks at S3. If you're not running servers, you don't need Inspector because it runs on servers, so on. But anything that you've got turned on, it will import the findings. It will take the findings and show you that data. It can automate some remediation depending on kind of the findings and whether you've configured that or not. But realistically, it's just a reduced way of saying, here's everything that's going on in the account from a security perspective in one place. Here's all the things you might want to care about. And typically, when you turn it on for the first time, you might see that CloudTrail will complain that CloudTrail has said that you've done some things with it. Like, well, of course I did, I turned it on. But it will tell you that. So if someone goes off and turns it on or turns it off in another account or starts mucking around with things, you can kind of see what's going on, and you can look at the findings across various accounts. And it supports a multiple account structure with your organizations, and it's just generally quite nice. It's not free. I don't know what the pricing is off the top of my head, but it's not free. It's free for 30 days, and then after that, I think you pay based on kind of the data that's coming in, and there's a cost calculator and so on. I don't like that it's not free. I think it should be free. I'm quite happy to pay for things like CloudTrail because that's based on log ingestion. So the more you do, the more you pay. Okay. Guard duty, I'm a bit iffy on paying for. I can stomach it. Macy, fine, pay for that one. But the tool that brings it all together into a nice, easy to digest kind of thing that you're looking at, I don't think they should charge for that. I really don't. I feel quite bad about that one. There we go.
They've got some examples on the site, and it doesn't look like it's going to cost an awful lot. So it's pay as you use, like everything else in AWS, and it's based on the number of checks per month. And I guess with a lot of these things, it's kind of, well, what constitutes a check, and how many checks am I going to have, and therefore, what is it going to cost me? But there are some pricing examples on the pricing page, and they've got small to medium-sized organizations. So let's continue with our theme of SMBs, and they're basically saying, here's a cost calculation. Here's how many kind of checks, ingestions, automation rules, etc. we think a small to medium-sized organization might use, and it's spitting out a total cost of 25 cents. So I don't think it's going to be outrageous, even though it is expensive. Even in the case of a very large organization, the example that they give is spitting out a total of $1,600 a month, which if you are a very large organization, that's probably going to feel like a fairly small number to you. I guess it depends how realistic the examples are, but I think it's pretty cost effective.
Yeah, it's just one of those principles, really. I don't like charging for security services. I think if you want to encourage people to use the security services, make them free, because that way people will use them. You just take the barriers away. Otherwise, you're going to get people say, oh, you don't use that. Why? Can't afford it. Okay, right. Purpose of the article, they have brought on 12 new security controls. Now, a security control is I think it's effectively a rule. I should know this because it was in the DevOps Pro exam, and I did get a question about it, but I must have got that one wrong. It's basically a rule. So they brought on 12 new controls, and with the controls, it now supports 3 new services. Now, these services I do like. So Athena, great. We like some controls that support Athena, because Athena is... For those that are unfamiliar, Athena is a way of querying your flat file data in S3. So you can have your ALB flow logs, your VPC flow logs, some CSV files, I think it's with Parquet as well. And you can query them with a SQL-like language. It's basically SQL. Directly out of S3, you're not loading the data in. Yes, you have to build the schema so you can tell it, what it's looking for, but you're not reading the data into like an intermediary and storing that. It's reading it direct from S3, which is great, but you pay based on what you're using. So controls around there and keeping your cost under control is good. We like that. It supports Amazon Document DB brackets with MongoDB compatibility, close brackets. Yes, that's the full service name. Good grief. But if you're stuck with using Document DB with MongoDB compatibility because you had an architect that wanted Mongo but didn't want Mongo, because they do manage Mongo as well, so like whatever. Again, good to see another service supported. And Amazon Neptune, which for those who are unfamiliar, is a graph database, which runs behind things like Facebook and social networks and what have you, because that stores data about objects and relationships between objects, and you get a lovely pretty picture if you look at them and so on. And it's good to see that Neptune is coming into the fold a little bit there, because AWS has generally been pushing Neptune as a player in the graph space, because up until now it's been basically Neo4j or nobody else, because why would you use anybody else? They were the primary player. But now with Neptune, you've got some better security controls because it's now baked into AWS Security Hub. Great. You've got serverless that they brought on a little while ago as well. Great. So it's becoming more of a full-fledged sort of service that they're supporting. So generally good to see. The new controls are looking at security best practices and some National Institute of Standards and Technology standards. So if you're working to these standards, great, because they're there on top of kind of what you're already dealing with. And yeah, it says, you can try it for 30 days. You get these additional controls. You can subscribe to the SNS topic for notifications about things when it comes to your region, because I don't think it's in all regions just yet, because that's a thing. But yeah, generally good. More security controls is great. I wish they'd make it free.
So Don't expect that you can just turn on Security Hub and go and get some cyber insurance. It's not going to be that simple. These are checks against best practice controls. So chances are when you turn it on, unless you've been very, very good in how you've built your environment, it's going to tell you that you're doing a whole load of things wrong. So you're going to need to correct those things before you say, hey, Mr. Cyber Insurance Company, look at my Security Hub. Because if they see a sea of red and a sea of wrong, then either you're not going to get any cyber insurance or your cyber insurance is going to be hideously expensive. So it's well worth going through the findings of Security Hub and getting either your managed service provider, like Logicata, or one of your infrastructure engineers to go away and fix some of the things that it's found that you're not doing correctly. So might be stating the obvious there, but worth stating nonetheless. So let's move on from the thrilling world of insurance and security checks into the even more thrilling world of Microsoft licensing. So you might wonder why we're going to talk about Microsoft licensing on an AWS news podcast, but there was an article last week. Microsoft has made a very small tweak to its licensing for Microsoft 365, which now means that if you're using Amazon WorkSpaces virtual desktop infrastructure, you can actually run Microsoft 365 on your Amazon WorkSpaces desktop without needing to pay for any additional licensing. So, John, I know you love a bit of Microsoft licensing. What do you think about this one? Surprised to see this?
I think the article itself, as you go kind of further down, sort of explains my thoughts on this quite well. It feels like a very large customer of Microsoft has said, well, we've got some workloads over here with you. We've got some workloads with AWS. We've got this enormous 365 license, which I keep wanting to call O365 because it was Office 365 forever. And I'm old now, so I can't change names in my head that well. And we will start either legal proceedings or we will just start dumping you as a supplier if you don't let us do this. That's what it feels like. It feels like they've been pressured by either a number of large-ish companies or one very big company that Microsoft have gone, oh, all right then. Which is why it's a very small tweak. Because if you kind of go through the article, and I haven't read the licensing because I have a life, but if you go through the article, there are listed providers which you're not allowed to run it on their virtual desktop services, and that's Alibaba, Amazon, Google, and weirdly Microsoft. So you can't just spin up an Azure VM and then install it on there. You have to go through their kind of virtual desktop service, which is outside of Azure. Don't know why they've done that, possibly so that they can say that they're not being anti-competitive because they're blocking their own cloud, maybe. But now they have remove the restriction very specifically for Amazon WorkSpaces. So you can't spin up an EC2 server, put O365 on there, M365 on there. You can't spin up a server inside VMware on AWS and do that. That's not allowed either. That's still not allowed because that would be covered by the restriction on AWS, on Amazon. But yeah,
I think you can do it. You just need to buy more licenses.
Yeah, it's like a license portability. Yeah, it's like a license portability thing. You also have to pay for the license to be able to move around, and I think it's basically doubling your cost because God bless Microsoft and the fact that they love to screw you to a post for licenses seems to be their only way of making money these days. It's weird. It's weird. This something about this doesn't sit right. It's just weird.
It hasn't come as a part of a wholesale review of Microsoft licensing. It's just a little thing that's popped up out of the blue. So like you say, some pressure somewhere has caused this. But, if you are using WorkSpaces or you want to use WorkSpaces, then it can only be good news. Anyway, I think we spent far too long already talking about Microsoft licensing. So let's move swiftly on to observability, which is quite fashionable at the moment. We've spoken about observability on the podcast before. This is an article from AWS's own website stating that AWS has been named as a challenger in the 2023 Gartner Magic Quadrant for Application Performance Monitoring and Observability. So it's not the first time. They were in it last year. I don't know how many consecutive years they've been in there now. But you can see in the, I mean, I'm looking at the article here, and we've got the Magic Quadrant. So in the challenges quadrant, which is the top left, we've got AWS, Cisco, Microsoft, and IBM. In the leaders, lots of vendors that you would expect, like Dynatrace, Datadog, New Relic, who really are the guys who are kind of leading in the observability space. Splunk and Honeycomb in the leaders quadrant as well. But AWS definitely moving up in that challenges quadrant to eat some of their suppliers' lunch.
Partners.
Is that the correct? Some of their partners. Yeah, so some of their vendor partners' lunch. And somehow I got Dog's Dinner in my mind because I was thinking about lunch and Datadog and Dog's Dinner. My mind just I got a little bit confused. But anyway, what are they doing well? What are they doing right, John? AWS must be doing something right to be challenging the much more established vendors like Datadog, New Relic, etc., who they really would be seen as the leaders in this space. So what are they doing right?
I've been banging on about this for a little while. CloudWatch generally has become a much better rounded tool for your monitoring and observability. Right, days gone by, it would do a little bit of metrics for your EC2s. You could import non-EC2s into it, but just like don't. And it would do your logs. And that was it. And CloudWatch Logs is arguably a separate service from CloudWatch Metrics to the extent that they call them CloudWatch Logs and CloudWatch Metrics. Like they actually call them different things, even though they're in the sort of same space. And now there's this whole piece around internet monitoring and error rate reporting and all sorts of other really cool stuff. And then you throw in things like X-ray as well. And then you've got actual proper observability is the word, into your code, and you can see where bottlenecks are and all that kind of thing. So it just feels like a relentless focus on the customer, the customer's needs, looking at what the rest of the market are doing, saying, well, if they're going other places for that, why can't they just spend more money with us and we'll just make it better? So I think it's just this relentless focus on serving the customer better in their space, rather than saying, Datadog have got that, or Dynatrace have got that, or send your logs to Splunk, we don't care. They're doing good things in good places in a really targeted way, I think, is what's going on.
Yeah, obviously now you've got the Amazon managed Grafana and managed service for Prometheus as well. So both sort of key open source projects in the observability space. So you can run all of that as a managed service without having the overhead of building servers and installing the software yourself, which is all great. But I did kind of dig a little bit deeper into this when I was reading the article. And I think part of the reason why AWS is still in the challenges quadrant and not the leaders quadrant is perhaps around lack of support for various different languages and frameworks. So I can't remember where I ended up, but I think I found that X-Ray, for example, currently only supports Java and something else. So .NET, I think it was.
That'll be a specific feature. X-Ray generally is quite well supported for the same languages that Lambda works with, so it's not too bad, but it's spotty.
Node.js, Java, and .NET. That's what it supports at the moment. So that's quite a lot. But
because Node.js covers JavaScript, it covers TypeScript, it covers Angular, it covers quite a bit.
But some big gaps there, nonetheless, which some of the other observability tools perhaps are covering off better. So maybe more support for more frameworks will help edge AWS into the leaders column. So I guess we have to see where they end up in the 2024 Magic Quadrant, but definitely good to see all of the advances that AWS is making there. Conscious of time, let's just go on to our last article for this week, which again is something we've spoken about a number of times on the podcast. The article is entitled "No Backing Away from the Cloud," and it's debunking this myth of cloud repatriation. The press love to jump on articles announcing that big companies have left the cloud and building their own data centers and blah, blah, blah. And I think we've long been saying it's not really a trend, but this article finally puts some numbers behind it to prove that this is not a trend. These are kind of isolated instances. And also goes on to talk about the actual cloud adoption trend. So what are your thoughts on this one, John?
Yeah, I mean, I've long said that cloud repatriation is a nonsense. It's a complete nonsense. They quote 2 companies in there at the top to say that, yes, it's nothing new. Dropbox left back in 2015. 37 Signals announced that they were doing it last October. And the only one I can think of that's done it is, I think, there's Zynga, who you won't have heard of, but they do like mobile games and stuff. And that's just because of the sheer amount of data they were moving up and down the pipes. And that's why they left AWS. Well, they were in AWS, they left AWS, and then they came back to AWS anyway. So it's like they sort of did a bit of a roundabout thing and worked out they're better off just taking it on the chin. In terms of the article more generally, I think it's CloudTweaks, but it's O'Reilly, basically.
Oh, really?
Oh, dear. Yes.
You're supposed to say no, O'Reilly.
I know, but every time someone makes that joke, I just see those programmer book memes where it's, throwing stuff at a wall until it sticks. Oh, really, media? Oh, dear. The thing that I kind of thought they were a little bit misguided on, per se, was that 20% of respondents of this survey, and it was 700 and odd companies, I think, so it's a reasonable sample size, weren't doing anything to manage cloud costs. And they found that number to be quite surprising. I'm surprised it's not higher than that, to be really honest, because the vast majority of the SMBs might have a guy that cares half the time. So, of course, they're not doing anything with cloud costs. They're barely doing anything in the cloud. Barely. Right, they're running their whole business in the cloud, but they're running 4 servers. Who cares about the costs? It runs the business. So I just think that one was an interesting thing, that they were surprised that it was that high, and I'm surprised it's not higher. But I suppose this is just at the coalface, in the trenches sort of view, rather than data backed.
Yeah, there's a couple of other stats in here that 58% of the respondents said their company would be spending more on the cloud this year than last, and another 32% were spending roughly the same amount, and only 10% were spending less. So doesn't really support a trend of cloud repatriation. But the press do love to jump on the same 2 examples every single time. Lovely to see that myth debunked. But we have reached the end of our time this week, so it's probably lucky that we didn't have a guest, because they wouldn't have had time to say anything. So we're back. We filled our time, and that is the end of season 2, episode 29 of Logicast. So thank you very much for listening. If you liked it, tell your friends. We are available for download on all major podcast distribution platforms, and we're now live on YouTube. So pretty easy to find Logicast wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode for you, and we'll see you again next time.